Hi everyone. My name is Amy Salazar. Thanks so much for being here today and joining us for the National Research Collaborative for Foster Alumni and Higher Education's webinar series. I'm part of the executive leadership team for the NRC FAHE. If you are not already on our listserv, please be sure to go to the website listed on the slide here. It's www.nrc-fahe.org. And if you go to that website and scroll down to closer to the bottom of the page, you'll see a section that that says subscribe. And if you do that, then you will start receiving our emails about upcoming events, newsletter, etc. So please be sure to join that if you haven't already and you're interested. Today for our webinar, I'll ask that if you can turn your, or keep your cameras off and, sorry, just doing a couple of settings, and type any question. Feel free to type any questions that you have in the chat box. And we are recording today's webinar as we do with all of our NRC FAHE webinars, and you can find those on the NRC FAHE website. There's a link to the YouTube page that has all of the previous webinar recordings on there. So before we get started today, I just want to do a quick mention of our upcoming webinars, and we have quite a few of them, so I won't go through all of them in detail. But our next, we have another webinar in February, Tuesday, February 22nd at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern. We'll be hearing from Alexis and Justin Black, who wrote the book, Redefining Normal, How Two Foster Kids Beat the Odds and Discovered Healing, Compassion, Happiness, and Love. And they will be talking with us that day about creating intentional community for those who've experienced trauma, including youth in foster care, also within the context of higher education. So please join us for that. And then we have two webinars in March. Our first one's Tuesday, March 8th, and that will be, we'll have presenters, Drs. Kizzy Lopez, Jennifer Geiger, Nathaniel Ockpich, and Sarah Gomez. We'll be talking about experiences or the impact of COVID on campus-based support programs serving youth with foster care experience. Our second March webinar, Tuesday, March 22nd, our presenter will be Delrisha White, who's the founder and principal consultant of Equity, Erudition, Anti-Racism Education. And she'll be doing a presentation on historically Black colleges and universities and how those colleges and universities can be particularly good settings and provide supportive environments for youth who have been in foster care. And finally, Wednesday, April 6th, we will be having a presentation from Dr. Judy Havlicek, Dr. Amy Dworsky, and Elisa Gitlow. I am probably saying a lot of names wrong. I apologize in advance. And we'll be learning about students in Illinois who were in foster care and went into community college, so what their experiences were like. So we have a lot of great webinars coming up. Please be sure to join us for any of those if those sound interesting to you. So today, our webinar, this is actually a bit of a continuation. It's okay if you weren't at the first part of this, but several of us met at the Society for Social Work and Research's conference a couple of months or a month ago. And Dr. Angelique Day was giving us some updates about our legislative updates about things to be aware of with the federal policy agenda related to youth in foster care. So we didn't have enough time to have that full conversation at that point. So we wanted to make a little bit more time for that. So we are going to today have Angelique Day talk with us about some of those priorities. So Angelique, I will hand it over to you. And do you want to share your slides or would you rather me do that?
I am fine to share my slides. Thanks, Amy. No worries at all. And so everyone knows all of our slides are available on the NRC FAHE website. So you will have absolute access to everything. I'm just excited to be here today and to continue this conversation. And today's presentation is not as much about telling you what all the current legislative pieces are that are relevant, because you are going to learn all about that in our newsletter that's going to be released the end of this month. What I'm focusing on is challenging you all to maximize your impact as a researcher. And so today I'm going to share with you some areas that the advocacy community is working on wanting to get done with Congress, and how you can actually help improve our success rate in being able to advocate for the things that we want for our transition age youth population. So in essence, I'm going to share with you what that federal advocacy agenda is, what research questions we need your help with in order to maximize our success in our advocacy work. And finally, to let you know about what are the existing pathways that advocates are using to try to advocate for the transition age policy improvements. So that's kind of our agenda we have for today. And I know that this presentation is going to solicit probably a ton of questions from all of you. So, and I want to encourage you to continue that dialogue with me after this presentation today. And I'm acknowledging that, you know, our research world is exploding in this area. I'm elated about it. I know we have a heavy volume of presentations that we've scheduled, and we're just all excited to keep you abreast of all the great things that are going on. All right, so on that note, let me share here. All right, can everyone see the full presentation? I don't have any live faces, so I just need a thumbs up. Okay, great. Thank you for the thumbs up. Appreciate it. All right. So again, one of the ways to maximize our research impact is to really ensure we're asking and answering the right questions. And we as researchers have this wonderful luxury in our different academic units to really be able to really think up, dream up, and conduct research studies that we're interested in. And what I want you all to move and think about is how can we be a little bit more mindful as researchers, and how can we better partner with community, this example here today being the policy world, to make sure that we are asking and answering the right questions, the ones that we need to answer to support that community level work. Now, one of the great things about the advocacy world in relationship to transition age youth is there is a very high percentage of those advocates who actually have lived experience. So, and as you know, because all of you have done work with foster care alumni, they have a lot of strong opinions about a lot of things, and it's really great. So I'm asking you all to take the opportunity to listen to those folks and have them direct some of the work that we do, rather than have them be passive recipients of the knowledge that we're generating. Okay. So I have structured this talk in a specific way, and I'm hoping that it all makes sense for you all. If it doesn't, let me know and I can change my approach. But this slide presentation is going to first off introduce you to the general larger advocacy topic that federal advocates are wanting to focus on. And so the bullets that are closer to the left are, this is what the federal advocates want to work on. And these bullets that are more slid to the right these are research questions that they need our help with to be able to answer, so that they can do their advocacy work to the best extent possible. So obviously we are all in the business of wanting to see policymakers make data-informed decision-making, and we are uniquely positioned as a critical stakeholder to maximize their ability to receive the information they need so they can do exactly that, make data-informed decisions. So what I'm proposing for you is, as all of you are wondering, is what are the research questions I should be focusing on? And I'm telling you, these are the ones the federal advocacy community wants us to be focusing on. So I'm challenging all of you to take a look at these questions. And if you are doing work in these particular areas, please alert me. I would love to make sure that the work that you're doing is shared with the folks who are in a position to make the changes that we all want to see.
Angelique, would you mind me just jumping in just for a second?
Please,
just really quick. So I just wanted to tell everyone, if you want to do it, make it a little bit bigger on the current, do it from the current slide, or if people want to be able to zoom in a little bit more, since we're looking at a lot of language, if you go to Zoom view options up at the top of the screen, and then it has zoom ratio, you can make it bigger or smaller for yourself, if that would be helpful.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that. And sorry about how wordy these slides are. I was trying to keep one topic per slide. That may have not been the smartest idea, but that's the approach. So thank you, Amy, for that support. So under this general advocacy topic of what do our advocates need to support their advocacy agenda related to helping foster youth complete high school and transition to post-secondary completion. So this first slide is, what is the information we need to support the college access aspect of our advocacy work? So these are some specific things that our advocates want. And again, more than half of them happen to be foster care alumni. So know that these priorities were informed through that voice. So the first bullet is mandate education counseling to be a mandatory part of the case planning obligation. So there's a couple of different things that would be really helpful if any of you are working in these areas or know other researchers who are. These are things that we really need to know the answers to be able to support moving this particular advocacy agenda item. One is if any of you are studying case planning and what's happening in the case planning process for transition age youth, folks are very interested in understanding what does that actually look like. How involved are youth in their case planning process? And do we know how many states or jurisdictions are mandating educational counseling as part of independent living program component or in general case management planning? So we're interested in understanding where that's happening, if at all. So the second agenda item is making support for post-secondary planning and transition services. And our advocates and our alumni specifically are calling out on practices such as tutoring, remedial support, and supports for applying to go to college. And wanting to make sure that those particular aspects, if they're offered, are reimbursable under Title IV-E. So the major research question that we need to be able to answer to support this is, what are the key components of college access programs right now, especially those that we have evidence to support that they are leading to increased college access and enrollment for foster youth. We know as a whole, we have less of us working on college access than on college retention. So that's something I'm trying to encourage within our NRC community is for those folks who are working on college access in terms of your research agenda, to what extent can you look at this research question as part of that work? And if you have some of this data already known, again, please share it. The next bullet, which is really focused on our folks that are doing engagement with courts in addition to child welfare agencies. And there's a few different court proposals in this agenda today. So one of those is to require that courts identify the general and special ed decision maker and consult with youth about their educational progress. Is the court asking about that as part of these court hearings? So that's what we need to best understand. We have no idea if this is happening or to what extent. So we need researchers to be able to ask those questions. To what extent are county courts doing this already? And are there states that could be elevated as best practice models that could be identified and replicated nationally. So that is our secondary college access priority. The next here is also focused on K-12. This is specifically focusing on getting a better understanding of school stability and what that looks like in the K-12 setting. So there's a couple different things the advocates are asking for related to school stability. One is requiring that child welfare agencies are collaborating with their State Department of Education to develop and implement a process to implement the school stability provisions of ESA, or the Elementary Secondary Education Act. This particular law has last been updated in 2016. So that's what we're looking at. We've had enough time go by now that we should be seeing some patterns of implementation and what this is looking like in states. The specific areas that we really want to assess and look at under ESA implementation is, what do state provisions look like and what do funding allocations look like for addressing transportation needs of students? How best interest determinations are being made at the state level, and how are they managing dispute resolution? So as part of this particular policy implementation, there is an interest in the advocacy community to adding a new requirement under ESA, and that is requiring states to implement a process to ensure that if our youth are changing schools due to placement changes specifically, that they receive credit for the work they completed previous to a school change. That is not in the current law, but is something that folks are pushing for. So there's a couple different things that we need help from the research community for this. One, we are really asking for a policy analysis of what's going on in your state, or folks want to look and do a multi-state analysis. That would be fabulous. What we really need help with is assessing the level of collaboration that's happening between your state or other states you're engaged with, in terms of what that child welfare and state education authority communication looks like. We really need a researcher to conduct a policy analysis on the foster care provisions of ESA, how that has been implemented in your state, how well how are those provisions being implemented, and then again, are there certain states that are doing it better than others that could be held up for replication. There is also a need and interest for researchers to conduct a study on placement moves and credit obtainment, and how many young people are not getting their credits or losing credits as a result of a placement move. We really need to understand how big of an issue this really is. And that will be really helpful as folks are gearing up for ESA reauthorization. The next school stability focus in the advocacy community is working to require that courts consult directly with youth about school stability. So this is another one of those, what are the courts doing? To what extent are county courts doing this already? And again, are there best practices that could be identified and replicated nationally? Okay, this is also focusing on K-12 and planning for college access. And so there's 3 positions that the advocacy community is trying to advocate for to improve federal oversight and leadership of educational success of foster youth. So one is requiring that the Children's Bureau create a new position that is responsible for being a point of contact with the U.S. Department of Education. Right now, as we have in current practice, there is a liaison in the U.S. Department of Education that is supposed to be talking with child welfare. There is nobody in the Children's Bureau side that has been assigned to do that. Those particular meetings are sporadic and they're not happening on a regular basis in terms of our two federal advocacy organizations working together to understand what's going on in terms of education well-being of youth in foster care. However, there have been states who have implemented these particular roles. We know it's not happening in all states, but some states have made this decision to do this. So there are some lessons to be learned about for states that made the choice to put education liaisons in their child welfare agency. How is that working? And how has that improved education well-being for young people in those states? Specifically, what lessons can be learned from those states' efforts, and how could they be used to support replication of that model at the federal level? Second question is, or advocacy agenda item, is to require as part of Title IV plans that child welfare agencies develop data sharing agreements with their state education authority, and to develop a state education report card to be able to publicly acknowledge what's going well and what isn't in states. And we know that, you know, these public report cards have been very successful in kind of, shaming states to do better and or allowing these to be a brag point for states that are doing really well. So specific questions that would support this advocacy item is having researchers help us understand, are there existing states that have already developed data sharing agreements between these two state agencies? And for states that do have existing linked data, are they using this data to inform educational decision-making or program development in their respective states? There are some wonderful researchers on this call today who have incredible experience using linked data between child welfare and education systems. So for those of you that are, this is a question I would love to have you think about. The final question for federal oversight is this idea of requiring school stability elements to be added to the national Afghar's data system. And so one question, and we are uniquely positioned as researchers to provide the advocacy community information on this topic and why it might be important, is from a research perspective, how is a lack of access to state and national administrative data impeding states and federal efforts to address the educational stability of foster youth? And I think we would have more to say than any other stakeholder group in this particular area. So those of you who are, working on more theoretical papers, this would be a great question for those of you to tackle or consider. Okay. And then we know the vast majority of our members in NRC FAHI are folks that are working on college retention. So the rest of this is really geared for my college retention researchers. So this particular TAE federal advocacy priority is really focused on how do we reform the education training voucher and post-secondary support infrastructure that exists at the federal level now to increase usability and utility of these systems. So as you can see, there's quite a few things that our advocacy community wants to do in this particular space. One is to allocate federal funds to provide foster care specific campus support programs in institutions of higher education. So we know that many of you are answering this research question. So again, we're just asking you to share your data as you have it. And that is, how can we increase the evidence that's available to show the need for building and maintaining targeted campus support programs? And do we have data from studies that show that having access to a campus support program actually increases college retention? So we know that many of you are exploring this, but it is very timely to share what you have at this current point in time. Next bullet, requiring that state Title IV child welfare agencies and institutions of higher ed who receive targeted federal funding from this campus support program. So this bullet is really related to getting bullet one passed. That this second bullet really goes along with that. And that is if you receive federal monies for building and supporting a campus support program, that part of that drawing down those funds would require a state child welfare agency and an institution of higher ed to actually enter into data sharing agreements to verify student eligibility for program participation, as well as for other federal financial aid resources. And this is where we have a practice gap nationwide now, is that, you know, for the sake of confidentiality, we don't have child welfare agencies regularly talking with campus-based support programs, and that there are students falling through the cracks who don't get identified, or students aren't aware of all the resources that they could be tapping into, or they find out too late. So the question that we need help with from the researchers is to better understand to what extent do existing campus-based support programs actually share data with state child welfare agencies now to determine student eligibility for program participation. Is that happening? What is the ways, or how are foster youth finding out about these campus support programs? And to what extent does data sharing assist in finding students on campuses that would otherwise not be successfully identified for program participation and other federal and state benefits to which they would be eligible? Next area of inquiry, advocates really want to ensure accountability in ETV distribution. Advocates have been very loud about this recently, and asking that the federal government require all jurisdictions that receive education training voucher allocations to provide data to the Children's Bureau on these following metrics. Now, I don't have a particular ask for the researchers' role in this area, but to alert you all, because part of what's important to understand is what are the research opportunities that can come out of this advocacy agenda if advocates are successful in moving that. And this is new data elements that could be available so that we can support the states that we live in to better understand how successful their ETV program is. And so there's 5 metrics that advocates are asking for. One is mandating that states report to the Children's Bureau the number of applications, the number of awards that are made, the number of applicants that are rejected, the reasons for rejection, and then the average award amount. And that advocates are requiring that these metrics be disaggregated by race, ethnicity, and gender. And this is part of the larger advocacy agenda of our current administration, is to want to increase the implementation of programming that is informed through a race equity lens. Okay.
Hey, Angelique, we have a comment in the comment box. Maybe before we
I'm
move
sorry,
on to
I'm having
no,
trouble
I'm
here.
monitoring it for you.
Oh,
It's okay.
perfect, perfect. Just tell me. Yep, go ahead.
So this one says it would be interesting to look at the rejection reasons to help support applicants in preparing applications.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's great. And I think there's a whole host of reasons for the folks who have done some work in this area, but we don't fully understand that. So yeah, I think being able to assess that, and by having it be a federal mandate, then we can really understand what's going on in all of our states. And we really don't have a good understanding of that right now. So in addition to accountability in ETV distribution, our advocates also want to see the whole ETV program improved in terms of usability. And there's a few different things they're asking for. They're asking that, including aligning distribution to other federal aid. And we know, for those of us who have done qualitative work, that young people get frustrated that, you know, school starts in August, but their ETV doesn't come in until October. And that, you know, obviously a lot of these tuition bills and expenses have to be paid before those ETV funds are received. The other issue is that advocates want to see these funds issued as direct cash payments to students, and they want to see policy changes to ETV that specifically prohibit requirements related to verification of expenses that are not required by Pell. So in essence, advocates are saying, you know, why can't we make ETV look a lot more like Pell in terms of the policies and practices that govern implementation of it? So additional changes to ETV, advocates are asking for the eligibility barriers that are imposed by states that are not in federal law should be removed. Why are states making it even harder for young people to access? Advocates want to see that we revise the timeline for eligibility for ETV, again, to align it to look more like Pell. Right now, no student eligible for ETV can access it for more than 5 years. Pell grants are 6 years. And for those of us who have done longitudinal studies of foster youth in college, you know, we know that it's taking about, 13.5 semesters for our young people to graduate. So ending it at 5 years really goes contrary to what we know from our research. Other things that advocates are asking for in terms of revisions to Pell is revising the academic progress requirements. Right now, if a young person has one bad semester, their ETV funds are frozen. So it's reevaluating that. And then removing the age cap of 26 for ETV eligibility. We know that for folks who receive Pell Grant, their clock starts for their 6 years when they enroll, and that there's no pressure that they have to enroll in their early 20s to be able to access Pell Grant. And that, so again, this concept again is based on why can't ETV look like Pell in terms of when your start date can start and how long you can have it for. So there's a few things that we need help from the research community to help the advocates understand to make the advocacy for these changes to ETV possible. One, we need your help determining what the current barriers to ETV access are in your state. We really need help with some process evaluation work. I think some researchers on this call have done some really great work in understanding the value of ETV in terms of an outcome analysis, but what advocates really need to know are more process related questions. How is the ETV actually working in your state? So that is really important. So understanding the process, and then finally conducting some studies with our foster youth that query them on their experiences with both ETV and Pell, and determining what the limitations and strengths of each of these financial aid options have been for this population of students. And we really also need to explore whether ETV awards amounts could be enhanced in regions of the country where housing and living costs are particularly high. We know that for students in states where the standard of living is lower, may be able to stretch their ETVs a lot further. But that's all speculation. We actually have no idea. No one's asked that question. So we need your help asking and answering that question. Okay. Now, we know that ETV is attached to Chafee. We also know that the Chafee program is one of these initiatives that is up for reauthorization this year. So there's going to be a lot of attention from Congress specifically on Chafee. And so the advocates have a lot of ideas on how they would like to see the Chafee program reimagined. So there's a few different visions they have. And again, we need help from the research community to be able to provide data to support these advocacy efforts. So one of the changes that our advocates want to see is to revamp Chafee to be a program that funds services and resources that support a successful transition to adulthood for young people until at least age 26. We now have ETV policy till 26. So the advocates are arguing, why can't we have this whole program expanded so that young people can benefit from all of Chafee until age 26. And there's a few ways in which advocates want to see this change happen. They want to be able to allow youth to re-engage in services at any time. They want to see us develop minimum standards of practice that must be provided to eligible youth. And they want to see the Children's Bureau develop guidance for expectations for service delivery and resources. So for my folks that study independent living programs, this ask is for you. We really would love to see some work done in states utilizing a consensus or Delphi process that would work with your states and youth to determine what the minimum standards of practice should be for ILP programs. Right now, there is very little guidance. We have a laundry list of things that folks can throw in an ILP program, but no regulations is into which components people provide, what dosage those should be provided in. Really, no guidance. So what the advocacy community would like to see is some more regulation in this area, and that we as researchers, if we can support our states in developing minimum standards of practice for what should be covered in an ILP program, and to also develop some fidelity tools that independent living programs can implement to increase programmability to adhere to these federal, or I should say, minimum standards of practice. And then we as researchers should also be a part of the equation for helping to track that fidelity compliance. And you don't have to change federal law at all to be able to embed this type of work and research work into any state's Chafee programs now. Any state can choose to utilize their Chafee dollars to support this type of work. But as researchers, you all need to be asking for this. Okay. The next question is, to what extent are youth re-engaging in independent living programs after taking a break from program participation? We know that youth, because they can start at age 14 and they're eligible for ILP programs till age 21 right now. So there's lots of times for young people to start and stop engagement in independent living programs. But again, we have no idea if this is happening, if young people are re-enrolling after stopping participation. We really don't know what that looks like. And for those that choose to take a break or stop engaging in an ILP program, understanding what are the life barriers that are impeding participation or make them want to take a break from an ILP program. It could be life circumstances. It could be that they feel like the program isn't giving them what they need. But again, we don't know the answers to any of these questions. So, and then this last point on this slide is not asking you all to do anything, but to alert you that the advocacy community is asking for new data requirements around independent living programs. And I know you as all researchers will probably be excited about seeing these provisions come to fruition. So the advocates are asking the Children's Bureau to adopt requirements for state agencies that supervise independent living program contracts to collect and publicly report data in a few different areas specifically related to ILPs. One is to have a public document that names each of these programs that have these contracts, including the description of that program and what are the core components that are offered. Next, they want to see that these contracts report the number of eligible youth they serve, report on the number of youth who participate in the program, the number of youth that are exposed to each of these identified core service components, and be able to report outcome data in all of the areas that are collected by the National Youth in Transition Database. And advocates are also asking not only for all of those elements, but to also add 2 additional new elements, one related to economic security and a second related to savings measures. And then finally, advocates are asking that the Children's Bureau requires states to collect satisfaction data and make that information publicly available on these various independent living programs that are receiving federal funds. So again, a mountain of new data for researchers to get into if this provision were to pass. Okay, so now that I've gone over the federal advocacy agenda and what all the data needs are, again, I think I've just assigned you all the next decade of research questions. But what I want you to understand is what are the vehicles that currently exist that can help support this advocacy agenda to come to fruition.
And Angelique, just a quick question. How
yes.
much time do we want to save for conversation? And just let me know and I can let you know when we're at that point.
Oh, sure. I am going to fly through these slides and ask you all as homework to go through them on your own. But I just wanted to point out kind of what the vehicles are, and then we'll spend the rest of the time on Q&A. So I'm giving you just a little bit of history here of the Title 4B initiative of the Social Security Act. This is the vehicle that's moving. So the advocacy community finds the most success in pushing legislation where you can attach it to legislation that has to move. And in the current political climate, the vehicle that has to move this year is Title 4B reauthorization. I'm not going to go through any of the information on this slide, but to give you, this is the information FYI that Title 4B currently funds. Here are the purposes of Title 4B. I'm going to have you read this on your own. This is just some additional information. We have all of these requests for new data elements. This is one aspect where we can require data to be collected. And then I also want to point out the advocates won a lot, and 4B is only 5% of federal money that is spent on child welfare. So we're asking and using this vehicle or advocating for new resources with a pot of money that is currently pretty small. So part of this ask in moving 4B is to increase the allocation for 4B. But I just wanted to kind of give you this overall landscape of what we're looking at related to this vehicle that advocates are looking to use. Probably way too much information than what this group wants to hear about, but I do want to spend the time kind of clarifying or answering questions related to these research asks, because that's what you all have been trained to do and can really help and support the advocacy community to help give them the data they need so that these policy decisions can be made in a data informed way. So I'm open to Q&A.
Okay, cool. So thanks, Angelique. So if you have any questions, you can request to be taken off of mute, and you can just kind of address your questions directly to Angelique, or you can type in the chat, whichever one you find more convenient for you. So we'll give people a second to do that.
Mm-hmm. And I want to acknowledge I blew through this really fast, so I may have overwhelmed many of you. So I'm also happy to continue dialogue if you want to process that, via email as well, or set up a Zoom call to talk through any questions that you have a particular interest in, or you may think you have some really great data that could help support. We want to know about that. So I've given you today in this slide my email, so we can dialogue directly via email. And I wanted to end this presentation just as a reminder to all of you that it is really important that we are getting our relevant and pressing research into the hands of policymakers who can best make these decisions using the best available data. And this is our unique contribution as researchers. We tend to speak to the choir, we publish in peer-reviewed journals, and we're talking to each other, and that's great. But to the extent that we can really expand our impact and be able to get our information in the hands of those who don't necessarily have access to our libraries or these peer-reviewed journals. We really do need to work on translating our research and lessons learned for the policy community. And I really appreciate all of you thinking about what you may have going on in your research agenda that fits some of these requests. I appreciate your willingness to share that data with the advocacy community. And I just want to encourage you all, if you are wondering about, where should I be investing my time in terms of research in this area, I hope that you really take to heart these questions that have been proposed in this presentation. And I'd love to see you all start working on them if you haven't already.
Okay, so one question that's come in is, what are some innovative ways you've seen researchers access data that they need to answer questions? I guess similar to the ones that you've been talking about.
Well, a lot of what I've put for you to think about now are things that can be done at the state level and then shared nationally for what's going well. And so I would say, if you all have relationships with your ILP, state administrator or your ETV state administrator, that having those conversations with those folks would allow you to potentially engage in a study to answer some of these questions. We know that many ILPs are run by private agencies. So if you're struggling with getting access to the state to work with you in a timely way, you can always lean into the privates in your community. They tend to be ready much more quickly. And for nonprofits, they don't just depend on state and federal dollars to fund their work. They also have to depend on private philanthropy to fundraise, to sustain their program. So that means that they need data. So they actually need your help. But they don't always know to ask, who to ask. And so you all taking the initiative to build those relationships is a great way to start.
I guess one question that I have maybe for the group, for people who are attending today, is, are any of you are kind of involved in any of these areas that Angelique was talking about today, and maybe pursuing some of these research questions? And if so, would you be willing to share a little bit with the group about what that's been looking like for you?
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if some folks are maybe hesitant to share because we're being recorded. By show of hands, would people be more willing to share what you're working on if we stopped the record button?
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Well, I can go. It's not necessarily a research project I'm working on, but I'm out here in Clark County, Washington, and I'm trying to start to form a little bit stronger ties with the ILS program here and think of different evaluations that may be beneficial to services. They provide a lot of services to youth in Clark County. And is there one key area that they might need extra support on, or help them build their own outreach to various rural counties? So that's kind of an emerging project I'm starting.
Wonderful. And Sarah, you said you're in the state of Washington?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, you are in luck because the state just gave a major contract to Treehouse. I don't know if you've built a relationship with them, but they are now in charge of college access programming for the whole state. So it may be an agency for you to reach out to.
Okay.
And they're pretty hungry for partnership.
Yeah. And Sarah, I've worked with Treehouse before as well. So yeah,
Okay.
we can definitely connect with them. So Jessica has a question. Jessica Ailman.
Mm-hmm. I'm not in research, but I'm working in a supervised independent living program on a campus in Texas. So I have a lot of access to youth in these programs, and I would love, if anybody would love to, talk to our students, they're more than willing to work with people. A lot of these same complaints, ETV down here has kind of stopped allowing those in independent living to get ETV. They're not
Mhm.
eligible anymore. So that's a lot of funding that they've lost for things like books. And so they've definitely expressed that they're willing to talk to people. So
And that's been my experience. Young people are very excited to alert people to the problems. We are uniquely positioned as researchers to help them elevate that voice. So Jessica, thank you. You've just offered a wonderful connection for researcher interested in partnering with you to do some of this work. And Jessica, we do have researchers in the NRC FAHI from Texas, but you can work with anyone in the country you want. So if there's any takers on the call, that'd be great.
And Jessica, I think you just accidentally messaged that to me, but we had a question of where are you in Texas from Richard, and Jessica says she's at Corpus Christi. So
Awesome.
I think I might be able to just allow participants to, okay. So I just changed the setting to allow participants to unmute yourselves. So you all should be able to do that now if you would like to. And Nate, would you like to just kind of say your question? I mean, I can read it for you, or you can say it either way. Let's see. I'll go ahead. So it says, so Nick Pitch said it'd be interesting to hear more about the need to understand the barriers to accessing ETV. Are you thinking about information that's gathered from on the ground perspective, so students and staff, or more from a state view, so from state ETV administrators?
I think when it comes to a process evaluation, part of the strength of that is to get an understanding of the barriers from all those different stakeholders. So I would say all of the above, Nate.
Mm-hmm. So any other questions or comments that people have? Any other ways that you're engaged in work in this area that others might benefit from learning from your experiences?
So one of the areas that I look at is youth in care, retention, post-secondary access and retention on campus. I'm in Illinois, and what I'm finding is that Illinois institutions, there is a lack of campus-based support for youth in care that are on campuses. And so looking at how are they identified? How are they accessing those supports? I've worked with DCFS in Illinois and have access to information related to the population and see that there are funding and scholarships that's supporting students that are going to colleges, both 2 and 4 year institutions, yet there's a lack of support once the students actually arrive on campus. And so how are these students being retained? How are they identified and even supported without further putting them, and also their intersecting identities further eclipsing their needs as youth in care. So looking at research around that.
That sounds wonderful. I'm so appreciative of you digging into that. I know that, until recently, a lot of the advocacy work has been focused on more financial aid, but you're saying your state has been investing in that and it's not enough. That there's this need for financial aid matched with targeted campus support programs that spell success in terms of retention.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And even looking at some of the work that's already been done around Wisconsin and Indiana and Illinois. And I think what is interesting is that we're surrounded by states that offer campus-based supports. Michigan has been great with their statewide initiative. Even there are campus-based supports at schools in Indiana, as well as in Wisconsin, and then right there in the middle is Illinois. Is a little behind, in really offering those supports and those transitional wraparound supports once on campus. And so I want to dig into that a little bit more and as it relates to just understanding of what this population needs once they are on campus, and looking at that barrier that exists with retention.
Mhm. Anyone else have a study that kind of fits the advocacy requests that you want to, bring forth or alert us to, even if it's not completely done yet?
So we have another chat that says recently a group of us examined data with scholarship recipients and found that for youth who are in foster care at the time of in college enrollment, extended foster care reduced time to college completion, coming from an interest in implementation research. And after hearing more about these different policies and support opportunities in education, I'm really interested in seeing more how these supports are implemented in college to engage students with foster care experience.
Mhm.
So I think, so kind of how policies are showing up specifically on the college campus, like how federal child welfare, I think that's kind of what you're getting at, Kat, right? Kind of that translation from child welfare policy to getting those enacted and taking place on college campuses.
Yeah, and I apologize. My internet hasn't been great today, so I didn't know if my audio would even come through. But yeah, just seeing how campuses are going about implementing these supports, and if they're doing it, to where are they having challenges in doing so, and whether or not there are research opportunities to help support them with those endeavors.
Mhm. No, that's great. And it does behoove institutions of higher ed to partner with child welfare. We know that there's more resources in the child welfare space to do some of this work. But unless institutions of higher ed are having those conversations with the child welfare authority, those resources may not be utilized to their maximum potential. And I know our previous Shakita talked about, Michigan, and it's the one state I know that actually utilizes Chafee money to fund their campus support programs. And they're putting ILP programs on college campuses. It's a really unique model. And the only one that I know that is using, and they're using their Chafee state match to do that. I don't know any other states that are doing that, but it's an example of how can you use public dollars to invest in university campus support programs. If you're looking at a policy connection, that's a good example.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for being here. We're at the hour, so I'm going to wrap up for today, but thank you, Angelique, for talking with us about research and legislative priorities. And just a reminder, this recording, as well as all of our other recordings, will be posted on NRC FAHE website. I put a couple of links down there to help guide you all to our previous PowerPoints is the first one, and then the second one is the YouTube channel with the full recordings. So thanks everyone for being here, and we hope you'll join us for a future webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.